All right, welcome back to the Bayou Retreats Game House. We are live with the Founders Podcast again. We're still working on making the sound good. So we've got some new microphones that we have a lot of toys in the shed. So we got some new microphones out to see if they sound good. So on the show tonight, we have Bars and Horse, Reels of Toe and Face Tank. We've had some cool guests the last few weeks, but whenever Dustin is not playing Dungeons and Dragons, we like to have him here on the podcast with us. So we're talking about, tonight we're going to be maybe talking about some kind of trying to remember some things. We're going to first-person shooters. We're going to talk about primarily the history of first-person shooters, and then the second half we're going to talk more about the modern shooter games.
So I'm not going to have a whole lot to add to this since, like, historically we know that I get super motion sick on first-person shooters. So, like, a lot of these I'm familiar with because I knew that they existed and I had friends that played them, but I don't have a whole lot of personal experience with them.
Yeah, we were trying to remember earlier. We were talking about Call of Duty. We're kind of getting back into Call of Duty, and we were trying to remember if you'd ever played Warzone with us. And I thought maybe you had played it with us just like a little bit.
I did, a very brief period.
Yeah, the genre is. We were talking earlier when we were doing arcades and we were doing consoles. Those were histories that were like 20 or 30 years long, maybe even 40, going back to 50 years long in the late 70s with the arcades. But the history of shooters is really more like, it's almost like it evolved heavily over a 10-year period, and then it's kind of been the technology and stuff hasn't changed a whole lot. There's been kind of new game modes being started. So what did you look up earlier on, like, with a first ever shooter?
Just for kicks, I spent like 10 seconds looking at what was before what we could remember, which was Wolfenstein 3D, and we knew there were games before Wolfenstein 3D, but I just went to go refresh, and it was Maze Wars, which was a very, very rudimentary, almost like a dungeon crawler, like we talked about back in 2 weeks ago. We were talking about D&D games and computer RPGs. Maze Wars was almost like one of those dungeon crawlers where you just get a little square and you can just go forward, right. But it was multiplayer.
Yep.
They played it over like DARPANET and those pre-internet things, and then that game later was re-released as Faceball on like Game Boy or something.
And I think eventually it was on SNES, or maybe it was like a Super Game Boy or something. But I remember it for Game Boy. It was like it was almost like Pac-Man 3D.
You were like Pac-Man.
It's like you were down there in the Pac-Man maze, going through it, left, right, forward. But it was like Pac-Man, but it was 3D.
And then there was a wireframe graphics game
that was like
called
vector graphics.
Battlezone. That was wireframes, and you were like a tank, and you were shooting other tanks, but it was all wireframes, kind of like that Star Wars arcade game. Actually, I think that one may have been an arcade game that was then ported. It was called Battlezone. Never played it.
Yeah, so I'm guessing, Dustin, you probably don't remember any of those.
Actually, I do remember Faceball very, very vaguely, maybe from the Game Boy port.
Yeah,
I definitely never played any of them.
Yeah, I had never heard of that Maze Wars game until I heard that it was later ported to Faceball. So that brings us to where the history of the genre really starts. And coincidentally, we remember it vividly. So the real title that was accepted to have launched the first-person shooter genre is Wolfenstein 3D. So memories of Wolfenstein 3D.
I mean, it was awesome. We remember playing it on an old computer, sitting
DOS,
there.
right?
Yeah, you had to boot it up in DOS.
Wolf 3D.
Yeah, you had to boot it up in DOS. I don't think you even used a mouse. It was just a keyboard, wasn't it? Wasn't it just a keyboard? It was just a keyboard.
I don't recall.
It was a keyboard. There was no mouse. There was definitely no mouse look. Yeah. It was just a keyboard. id was the company that made Wolfenstein 3D, and they basically invented the first-person shooter genre as a genre. Wolfenstein and Doom became the genre. And in fact, I think for a little while they were just called Doom clones or whatever. Like that's what the genre was called.
Well, yeah, because everybody used the Doom engine.
Right. Yeah. So they called the genre Doom clone before it became first-person shooter.
So I told y'all the other day, do y'all remember where id was founded?
No.
I do not.
Shreveport.
Oh, yeah?
Really? Shreveport?
How about that?
Right here in CJ's digs, even though his hometown is Lake Charles, we'll never let him live that down. But
what id invented that kind of changed the game, so to speak, is the idea that you take pixels of the screen and you only draw what that pixel can see. It's called ray casting. Ray tracing is the big word now, which is like 1,000 times more complex. But ray casting is what id sort of invented, where you're only drawing, a couple thousand pixels, no matter what. The computer only draws the things you can see. And that was like kind of the game changer where
Yeah.
now they could have real graphics and not overload the computers, because the computers were terrible at the time, relatively speaking.
It was like before even discrete graphics.
There
cards
was no
even a
3D
thing, right?
hardware at all. These were like, I mean, obviously single core, 50 megahertz, 25 megahertz PCs, things like that, 486s.
386. No, you could run Doom.
386s
You could
maybe.
run Doom 1 on a 386-60 with 4 megs of RAM and
Yeah.
squeeze every bit of life out of it.
Yeah.
And those were and back then, like in Wolfenstein and in Doom, it was like, or maybe Doom was the first one where it wasn't, but Wolfenstein, it was the floor and the ceiling like basically weren't rendered. It was only the walls, and the walls were like the only 3D content, and they had to be orthogonal to each other, and then everything within this scene was a sprite.
Yeah, and that's because of the way it's still like a map of a maze that the computer knows, but then it just knows, okay, I'm this far away, draw the wall, draw it this tall.
Yeah.
Like that's all it knew. And then they also figured out, I think with Wolfenstein, okay, how to put a bitmap, texture map on it, but it was still, the wall is this far away, so draw it this tall. And there was nothing on the ceilings, nothing on the floors.
Yeah. So
No, I think Wolfenstein did have floors.
maybe it did.
Because whenever you shot people, they would fall into puddles on the ground.
Well, just a sprite.
Yeah.
That was just a sprite of the puddle, I'm pretty sure.
It might have had a
bet
basic
if-
rendering of a floor.
But I bet if you go look, well, no, I mean there was a
We have the
floor,
internet right here.
but I bet if you go look, the floors.
Continue on. I will.
I bet if you go
in my
look,
mind, the floor is like solid light gray, and the ceiling is solid
is the
dark
same
gray.
for that whole level.
Yeah,
I bet.
right. Yeah. And so once you get into Doom, then we talked about Marathon a little bit. It was less kind of it was a little bit to the side of the mainstream because it was Mac only, right? So that's why it wasn't really kind of common. But that era is when you started to get where you could have more complex wall shapes. It wasn't always just these orthogonal corners. You could have more complex shapes in the walls. You could
Yes, there
have
were
steps that
floors.
you could climb up. Do what?
Yeah,
Yes,
There
there
was
were
floors.
I think it would be the
rendered in
same
Wolfenstein.
floor on the
Yeah.
same on the entire
Yes,
level.
the entire
though.
level
Right.
is the same floor.
Right.
Yeah, but then by the time you got to Doom and Marathon, you could have different tiers. You could go upstairs and things like that. It wasn't just this kind of 2D platform. There was more complex height levels to it and more complex wall shapes. And then you were telling us earlier about the first one that had Heretic was the first one
developed by
where you could-
Ravensoft. It used the Doom engine. It was the first game ever to have, or first person shooter to have a vertical access where you could look up and down.
Yeah, and it wasn't
I'm
even.
thinking it's still not a mouse. It's still just.
Heretic was.
Was it a mouse?
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe Doom was as well.
And these were all still the reticle is the dead center of the screen.
Yes.
You can't really move your aim. Your aiming reticle is the screen.
I'm pretty sure that Wolfenstein though was not even a mouse. I'm pretty
That
sure.
might be true.
Right,
I don't
yeah.
remember
I
that
think it was.
specifically.
I think it was keyboard only.
And then kind of floating over here on the side of all these. Remember Descent?
Yep.
And Descent was 3 dimensions. You could fly around in 3
Right,
dimensions, but
yeah.
it kind of doesn't follow. It's kind of off on its own. 'Cause it's space.
I remember
Yeah, it was like a
playing
space
Descent
sim.
as the demo at Sam's.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so
when we
it-
used to find all of our games in
Yeah.
the demos at Sam's.
For our youngins that are listening to our podcast that weren't around in the late '80s and early '90s and all the '90s, one thing that all was common to all these games, the way these games got popular, was the shareware.
Yep.
They got
Yeah.
popular by having a $1 or $2 even free sample of the game in the like in Office Depot or whatever. Like I remember Descent. We never even owned Descent.
No, we never.
just-
I don't think we ever
we-
owned Wolfenstein either.
Maybe
I
not.
did own Wolfenstein.
Like, did we ever
I think
kill?
we owned. Uncle Dwayne owned Wolfenstein.
And I don't think he did. I think he had it
just
installed
shareware
on his
only?
computer. Do you ever remember killing Mecha Hitler?
No, nope, don't remember
I
that.
did.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you remember killing Mecha Hitler, that's the end of Wolfenstein.
Yeah, so before the internet, that's how they advertised games.
That was the only reason to have a subscription to PC Gamer. Was every
with
other
the-
one
yeah,
came with
came
the
with the-
demo CD of
Yeah.
10 shareware games.
Yep. All right, so let's look at our rundown and see where that gets us because we were talking about Duke Nukem. And Duke Nukem, interestingly enough, we were in the off season this last week. We were talking a lot about how did we get to talking about Grand Theft Auto and the
Jeremy was
MPAA
just
and
talking
all
about
that.
it. I think.
Yeah.
Duke
Yeah, but
Nukem
they
was
were
kind of
talking-
the first first gen of
Slap a hooker.
chauvinistic, violence against
They'd
women
be
and
strippers,
inappropriate-
and you can go give them money and all that. And
Dude, and people loved Duke Nukem so much because of that, but I just always remember it being a terribly programmed game. It was like
we
the
never
we
played
didn't
it.
like it.
We didn't play
I
it.
mean, I have
it was the
played
beginning of the downfall as far as I'm concerned, because the graphics weren't noticeably better than Doom, but you needed a 586 like 100 megahertz processor, and it still ran like garbage. It just programmed Doom so well. It was a well-oiled machine, and it looked just as good as Duke Nukem.
Yeah.
But Duke Nukem
Had
ran
strippers
like
in it.
hot garbage.
ran poorly also.
Yeah.
So that gets us to Quake, and that's where you kind of start to see the advent of, not that you couldn't play Doom multiplayer, but I think Quake is kind of where you got to the point where the developers were really saying, we can design this game to have a multiplayer component.
Well, I mean,
Right.
whenever Doom came out, the internet really didn't exist.
yeah.
Well, yeah, but
Quake is probably fully modern. If you talk about the first fully modern shooter,
Was
it's probably
Quake the first
Quake.
game to use the Unreal Engine?
I think there was a game called Unreal. I assume
Yeah,
that was the
like-
first one to use the Unreal Engine. I think
yeah.
because I think there was a game called Unreal.
Yes. It's actually very good also.
So either one of the right around then, those are both 3D. They both had internet access. You could play multiplayer games. Those are the first fully modern shooters.
Yeah.
Like when you could say, well, either that or GoldenEye. You could call
So
either one of those
we-
the first fully modern.
We have
shooter.
GoldenEye on
No,
there.
not GoldenEye, because the control scheme was a disaster. So, but Quake and Unreal, mouse and keyboard.
Yeah, so where did WASD come from? Where did WASD to walk and
that
mouse
was
and
from
mouse to look?
professional gamers.
Like what game was it?
Yeah,
used
what-
first
what
then?
era
Do
of
you know
gaming
the
did it?
answer?
No, I don't
It was
know the
right
answer.
around there because I know
Quake or
Wolfenstein
Quake
was
2,
Wolfenstein was just arrow keys maybe
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
space bar to shoot.
Yeah.
You know, you weren't.
I remember transitioning from keyboard to mouse and keyboard on Quake 2.
I feel like I tend to agree with you, is because I think Doom was still, arrow keys and maybe the mouse to aim, but arrow keys. And by the time you were using a mouse primarily, you had probably switched over to WASD because it's more comfortable than being over here with the keyboard.
You know what? Honestly, I had never even thought of doing that. Granted, again, I'm not the FPS guy in the group, but until we played Overwatch, it never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
I was like, that's stupid. Why would I
Using
put my hand over here?
WASD,
And then I
right.
moved my hand. I was like, I don't like that this makes sense.
Right.
But I do remember people, whenever we played Quake 2, we would go raid the McNeese lab and we would have all of it. And the guys that were really good, thinking back, they all held their mouse over here, and they had all their keybinds and they had all these extra keys. And one of the only things that made me good at that was I was nerdy enough to go into the help file and figure out how to do keybinds and stuff. But the guys that were really good all played on WASD.
And that just came from some gamer
player.
figured that out.
Mhm.
Figured
Yeah.
out that
I
was
know
the most
that,
comfortable
yeah.
place to have your fingers to be able to, in those natural place to drive with.
Yep.
And then it came out of just a gamer's preference, and then it became adopted by more and more gamers, and then eventually became adopted by the industry as now that's how you drive in a
Right.
shooter.
Yep.
There's just no other way. There was I was reading about alternative control schemes, and there was for a while in the late 90s, early 2000s, the military pushed a controller, headset, and foot pedals control scheme system that they were trying to make they were trying to make simulators that were more similar, where you walked with your feet and you looked with your head and you moved with your hands and did things with your hands. And so they I can't remember what it was called. I don't know if anybody in the chat remembers that, but it was like in a peripheral, just like how you have joystick and throttle control, foot pedals for a flight simulator.
Duffel says the lighting from Dustin's legs is brighter than Overwatch 2's future.
Well, that's not very... that's not really saying a whole lot.
So the high point is that Duffel's in the chat.
That's
Duffel's
true,
watching
yeah.
the stream.
Right.
It might be his first time, and
So
Dustin is.
I did also, as soon as I put my legs up, go, ooh, I'm awfully pale.
Yeah. It looks
it's
a little
the lighting.
worse.
He is
Yeah.
beautifully tan. He's beautifully
Yeah.
tan. It's the lighting.
Compared to my legs, his legs are literally fantastically tanned.
Yeah.
We get back on track.
Yeah, back on track. So, and Duff, I'm glad you're here, because you may be only here because you heard that we're talking about Overwatch. We're talking about shooters, and Duffel obviously got involved with Sign
Yeah.
Esports from the Overwatch scene, and his crew was real big in all of our shooter games. I think they had a Call of Duty team at one point. Maybe I don't know if they ever had a Halo team. We try to pretend that everybody liked Halo, but most people didn't.
Everybody liked Halo 2 and 3.
Everybody liked Halo 2 and 3. Everybody liked Halo Infinite for 15 minutes. So, okay, let's go back to the rundown and see where we're at. We were talking about GoldenEye.
Right. So,
Oddly enough, on that topic about the military thing, I actually had a game that used that control setup that was a 3D FPS for PC.
You were probably on somebody's radar for this guy's going to get recruited.
Yeah. I cannot remember what it was called, but they were trying to get something alternative, but it turns out the gamers are just familiar with WASD on one hand and mouse on the other is what they're familiar with. Nintendo kind of did the same thing. When the Wii came out, they tried to push these motion controllers where you play the game with your arms and hands and you stand up, and the whole gaming community is like, well, we don't want to do that. Just like, give us a controller.
I loved it.
I think that's
Wii Sports.
Right.
Only Wii Sports.
The Wii motion controllers, I think, were largely accepted as a good utensil, a good controller.
For Wii Sports.
Well, it was also Link's crossbow training also used the motion indicator on it. I guess that was more like a light gun.
Sports only. I think
they tried to make it
pretty
to where
well accepted.
Where Metroid Prime 3 was like going to be this great app where you aimed and pointed with the controller, with the motion controller. But before we get into it, because I don't know if you realize this or not, Metroid Prime 2002.
Yeah.
Halo 2001.
Right.
It's like late 90s. Metroid Prime is pretty OG. So let's go back to late 90s right quick.
All right. So GoldenEye, the thing to know about GoldenEye, the thing to remember about GoldenEye is that the consoles did not have performance problems. They couldn't not do first-person shooters because of performance problems. Because like you said, Doom would run on anything.
Right.
And Wolfenstein would run on anything. But Doom would run on anything. In fact, I think that was a Sega Genesis port of Doom at one point.
I think you were correct.
Right. So it wasn't that the consoles, even the 16 and 32-bit consoles, or not the 16 maybe, but the maybe the 16-bit consoles. They could run the rudimentary fake 3D graphics of Doom, but the controls were no one had figured it out. For one thing, there were just only a couple buttons, and the controls were not figured out for how to aim well, especially once the first FPS transitioned to using a mouse. That was the big hang-up. So GoldenEye was kind of an experimental. How are we going to have a control system that works? And it worked. We learned it. It was kind of weird. And we got it, and we were good at it. We got good at it. Everybody got good at it. Would you just get us logged out of the Twitch?
No, it was already logged out. I was going to tell Duffel that he'll be fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was weird. It was like you strafed with, you had the
walk and look with one stick, and then you strafe with
it
the
was
C-pad.
walk and look with the thumbstick, and then strafe and something else, and then you held the trigger
and then you could
stand still and aim.
Sidestep.
That was the C stick.
Yeah.
But then you held the bumpers to stand still and free aim.
Yeah.
And it was really weird because they were limited by only having one analog stick.
Yeah.
Right. So when you had Halo, you get the two analog sticks, and they had between GoldenEye and Halo, somebody mastered the 2-stick analog stick driving that we now use every single game.
So I know on GoldenEye, the only multiplayer modes on GoldenEye were 1v1v1v1. There was different game modes, and I think Quake back in Quake on the PC, were there team game modes, or was it all?
Well, you had mentioned they had Team Fortress.
There were a bunch of mods.
Yeah.
So like Quake 2 had a Team Fortress mod, which was the reason I loved Overwatch so much, and they had a bunch. The community would just upload things, so
and that was the Quake
download a bunch
mods.
Of stuff. Yeah,
it's where all those different game types came in with. They made. I mean, I think all their games were like easily moddable.
Yeah.
Like they weren't proprietary with their stuff. They sold their engine to like anybody who would buy it for anything. Like peanuts, they would just sell the engine.
Yeah.
So all those different game types players invented. And
I remember.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was trying to remember back when. I remember when Perfect Dark came out. You could play Perfect Dark against computers as a team on the same console. You could play 4-player split screen. You could play 1v1v1v1 or 2v2 or 4 against computers. But in GoldenEye, there wasn't that. So sometime in that couple years, the kind of advent of team
playing against bots,
co-op,
they called them
playing
sims.
against
simulants.
They called them simulants.
Go back one more thing. We missed one game. We missed Rise of the Triad. I don't know if we talked about Rise of the Triad.
Not.
Okay, that was like I think the first game where you could pick different characters in a first-person shooter, but you could pick different characters that have different abilities and different. They would do different things. Then Team Fortress was like totally a team shooter, where you had the tank and the healer and whatever, but Rise of the Triad...
And different game modes with capture the flag and everything.
Right. Rise of the Triad, you had just different kind of... this guy was slower but had more life. I don't remember exactly the way it was, but it wasn't all the same. You could pick your character. Even in GoldenEye, you could pick your character, but it was just a skin.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. They were actually different abilities and stuff like that. So
yeah, so you had what you had were different weapons, but you really couldn't customize your character.
right.
Yeah. So then by the time 2001, 2002 rolls around, then you have really fully developed games that launch with a great story, cinematics, first-person play in the campaign, and a multiplayer component that's designed in with the game. Like, and Halo is kind of the quintessential one. Halo was in 2001. Halo 2 was in 2004. And I think that's pretty much where the genre realized it had arrived at basically perfection.
Yeah, and
all the puzzle pieces were there.
And the genre had expanded to include consoles. So
Yeah.
like GoldenEye was the beginning of first-person shooters on consoles, and Halo was like Halo 1 was not the pinnacle of it, but the point at which it had completely taken over consoles. As far as it was now, you could play on PC or you could play on console.
Jack says actually that he does remember playing Quake multiplayer PvE.
Okay.
So
Maybe so. And
I'm
maybe it was mine.
going to be perfectly honest. Until, I don't know, Halo 4, I didn't even know that first-person shooters had a story.
yep.
Yeah.
Didn't know that was a thing.
We're talking kind of mostly about the multiplayer ones, but around this time I didn't realize how early on in the first person shooter life of the genre Metroid Prime was. Like in my mind it was like Metroid was a 2D game for its whole entire life, and then just in the last year or two they started doing these 3D Metroid Prime games, but actually that was in 2002, which was less than 10 years, 5, 6, 7 years after really the 3D first person shooter genre was even a thing.
And they on Metroid Prime was for the GameCube.
Yeah. Right.
And they were still struggling from there was not 2 analog sticks.
Right.
So the Metroid Prime control scheme is iffy. Now they re-released it on Switch. Metroid Prime is a great game. You probably never played it, huh? They re-released
really
it
good
recently on Switch with just smooth graphics. It runs good and everything, and a traditional two-stick control system. It's a good play if you hadn't played it.
Funny thing that two-stick shooter is already, the name two-stick shooter is already taken. It doesn't mean this.
No, it does not. No,
it just.
no.
I was
I'm
thinking
just
about
saying
earlier.
that to compare it to
Yeah.
the GameCube and the Nintendo 64 that only had one analog
Yeah,
stick.
it's just funny because I think that also, when we're talking about this history, I keep thinking two-stick shooter in my mind, but that's not what a two-stick shooter is.
Nope.
Two-stick shooter is top-down, and you're driving around with one thing and turning yourself with
That's
another,
right.
and you're fanning out
like
your bullets or whatever.
Gauntlet is
Yeah.
a big one.
Yeah.
Geometry Wars. If you haven't played Geometry Wars, that's like the quintessential modern two-stick shooter. You should play Geometry Wars. It's really cool.
When we're going to take a quick break, and then we come back from the break, we'll talk more about the modern era and the kind of the advent of the esports side of first-person shooters. Because I think I don't really remember when CS:GO came out. I don't really remember when Halo became an esport. But Counter-Strike is as old as some of these games. But CS:GO was like the 4th or 5th Counter-Strike game. And I think it's kind of the first one that was a big major esport. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Maybe in the break we can research a little bit. And then we're going to get on remote guest, Matthew. What's Matthew's last name? Do you know what his last name? No, you don't know his last name? And Matthew is his, like, kind of his handle as well, like, right?
Yes.
It's Matthew's real life name and also his gamer tag or whatever, right? So he doesn't have Matthew.
But with like a 3.
Yeah. So Matthew with a 3. That's what we'll call him. We'll call him Matthew with a 3. And he worked with us a couple times. He's started with us on high school esports. I think even in junior high.
Yeah,
and then
he was on junior high.
Played through our high school esports seasons, and now has been on our crew for a couple of Cyphicons. So we're going to get him to join us here in a minute. Do you guys got any parting thoughts before we go to the quick break?
I don't think so.
All right, we'll talk. We'll come back and we will talk about the modern end of the shooter history and the esports of it, and we'll get our guest on here with us in just a couple of minutes. We'll be right back after this. Okay, we are back live, and I think we have Matthew on the line here. I'm going to see if we can get him in. Let's see. We have Matthew.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I am here.
Okay, awesome, cool. So, guys, hopefully y'all on the watching on the stream, you can hear him. We can hear him. We can see his beautiful face. We have him virtual presenced in to that 4th recliner where you can't even tell that he's not there.
Oh, it looks like he's really there.
It's like he's really there, right there, sitting in the recliner. So, Matthew, I don't know if you were watching the rest of the show. Dustin's like you're patting him right on the head. Yeah. I don't know if you were watching the first half of the show, but we talked a lot about the history of kind of where first-person shooters started and the evolution through kind of how the industry handled the graphics and the control schemes and moving into multiplayer content. So I want to ask you briefly, since you're the youngin on the show tonight, what is your first kind of experience with a first-person shooter? When did you start playing first-person shooter games?
Well, I mean, as a kid, my dad always played Call of Duty, but I was not interested in it. And then in about like 5th grade, one of my friends showed me Overwatch, and I was just hooked. So that's the first-person shooter that I actually played was Overwatch.
Okay, cool. So Overwatch was, I said youngin, right? So we love you, Matt. We're not making fun of you for being young. You're just it's the year you were born. But your first experience being Overwatch means that you just probably had your eyes glazed over if you were watching the first half of this show, because all we talked about was first-person shooters from 10, 15, 20 years ago. Ooh. So what we want to talk about now is a little kind of the modern side. And the as the industry developed into competitive multiplayer and then into there you go. Thank you for turning your light back on. Now we can see
there you go.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts? You got involved with Sign Esports through our high school esports program, right?
Yeah. I was on a middle school team.
Okay, so were you playing competitive esports titles before that? Like, was that kind of like part of your life already?
Actually, yeah. Whenever they started the Overwatch League, I was super into it, and I had a console team, like way back when, and then whenever they announced, like way back when is in like 2019-ish.
Yeah, 2019, way back when, yeah. Okay, so the esports competitive gaming was kind of already part of your thing. You discovered Sign Esports through basically the Overwatch League. Mm-hmm. So that brings us kind of into the modern side. You guys, what are y'all's first memories of like the esports side of competitive first-person shooters game? We were talking earlier about, was it CS:GO?
So to me, I remember always our buddy Paul was real into. Was it CS:GO that he was so into? Or he used to play at the dorm all the time. But anyway, I remember always knowing either. I think it was maybe Counter-Strike or one of the early Counter-Strikes. I always knew that this game was played competitively, but we were never really into it. We never watched it. There was never a lot of mainstream esports, especially not first-person shooters, that I remember. We knew they were played competitively. We did not consume it.
I don't remember
until Overwatch. I don't remember consuming a esport first-person shooter until Overwatch.
I think we did a little bit follow HCS, a very tiny bit. Halo was a esport title, first party. Microsoft had a Halo Championship Series in like the mid-20 teens, like in 2013, 2014, because we had a team in HCS in 2015. Remember that? Will Lemons was the captain. Ryan Prowse was their coach.
Okay, yeah.
And, was that long ago?
It was 2015. Yeah.
Like I said,
our big Halo tournament was in 2014.
Yeah,
and even then, I know Halo
2012 when Halo 4 came out.
But same thing. I know Halo was played competitively back then because we knew it was played competitively, but we weren't that into it, and no one was really that into it. It was really, to me, what I remember is very niche.
Yeah, and like Jack says, way back all the way OG QuakeCon. That was kind of the first where you would bring like hundreds of computers and monitors.
I do
and play
recall.
These giant
so I remember
LAN
being
parties.
vaguely aware that big tournaments like that happened back whenever I would go and play.
Yeah, but super niche.
Yeah,
not like Overwatch. Not like there's ads on TV.
So Overwatch. Let's segue into Overwatch being like a mainstream. Overwatch is the game where the industry decided to try to take esports mainstream. Matthew, do you remember? Were you keeping up with Overwatch League as a kind of a spectator sport before you got involved with our Overwatch scene?
Oh yeah, dude, I was crazy for it. Like just it was just really weird seeing like something that I was really interested in like as a career. That was kind of like my biggest like pull towards it. I wasn't super big into Overwatch pre-Overwatch League, but I know it was pretty good. I remember they used to have a lot of like the World Cup matches and stuff on like Disney XD. And that was huge.
Was it really?
Yeah, there were before everything was on streaming. Before streaming was like bigger than TV. There were some Overwatch that played on TV. Like you could go find Overwatch on TV for a little while.
They had a few of them on, like he said, on Disney XD. They had a couple ventured onto ESPN3. There was a couple of broadcasts on ESPN3.
Heroes of the Dorm was on. I don't remember when
Heroes
that was,
of the Dorm,
but
yeah,
that was
I
not
remember
Overwatch.
that,
was
Yeah,
that other game.
Heroes of the Storm.
Yeah.
Heroes of the Storm.
Blizzard's
Yeah.
MOBA.
So,
But it was like that was on ESPN too. That was like
Was
real
it?
mainstream, regular cable ESPN.
Was it?
Heroes of the
Okay.
Dorm was, yeah.
So Matthew, I have an important question
Okay.
that Corey and Eric aren't going to care about.
Okay.
Who is your favorite Overwatch League team?
Whenever I was about like Christmas of my 7th grade year, my mom got me a Dallas Fuel jersey. So I was a Dallas Fuel and like Houston Outlaws fan for the longest. But as it went on, I was less a fan of like individual teams, and I was more just a fan of like the whole thing. Like I just loved watching the competition.
Yeah, that's kind of how we were. It's just like cheering for the whole concept.
Well, but we were Houston Outlaws.
The Houston
they were our
Outlaws
local
were- yeah.
local team. But I remember, so we loved the Houston Outlaws because they were our local team. But then y'all remember when Shanghai had a team, and I remember with Shanghai
They were like
they
0-15.
lost like their first 15 games.
It was
You remember that?
0-40.
The entire
actually.
first season
Yeah.
and most
they
of the
lost
second.
every game the whole season. That was kind of like
it was
I'm
huge
for them.
deal whenever they won their first game.
Yeah.
So Overwatch, it was the arena esport for a while there, for a very short window. We kind of think COVID killed it, but it was.
It was apparently dead before that, which I'll enlighten you on.
Yeah. So,
later.
but there was a glimmer of that stadium esports might be a thing, and then it was, but it was already dead. You said.
Yeah, so towards the end of the Overwatch League, what nobody knows about, or I say nobody knows about, what came to light much later was Blizzard Arena. They didn't get rid of it because Overwatch needed to move out. They got rid of it because it was a huge money pit. The arena was empty, and to sell tickets to investors, they would apparently just go grab random people off the streets, give them tickets, and put butts in seats to make it look like a success, to try and build hype where there was none.
Yeah. Matt, did you ever go to an Overwatch League game in real life, or did you watch on stream?
I was purely on stream. I actually just when I got home yesterday from DreamHack, so
nice.
I went to their like new kind of Overwatch competitive system. Speaking of Houston Outlaws, I met I don't know if y'all are familiar with Raucus. He was a support player for them. I was watching the
Raucus
match,
is awesome.
and he just walked up right next to me, and we just talked for a while about esports. It was really cool.
Is
That's
he? So what's he doing since he got let go from the Sentinels doing Valorant?
He just said he's been focusing on like real life, and he's just working now.
That's cool.
That's kind of one of the things you see with esports, like the esports personalities, is you get it's a season of life, and you do see that a lot of them, they start in high school and they become famous when they're 17, 18. By the time they're 21, 22 years old, they move on to something else. So there's not a lot of 40-year-old esports stars.
Well, it's kind of like being a famous college athlete.
Yeah.
You know, it's a season, and then a very, very small sliver of them stay famous, but most of them just go on about their daily lives.
Yeah, so
after they're famous esports.
This kind of plays into what we've talked about a lot on this podcast, and also just in conversations amongst ourselves at work or at game night or whatever, about how it was stadium esports ever really a thing? Did people ever really want that, or did everybody just think it was a cool thing, and that everybody wanted to watch from their house or watch from their computer, but they wanted the spectacle of thinking that there was this giant, like League of Legends is kind of the exception, where in Korea there are actually gigantic stadium events with League of Legends players, two teams, and there's 70,000 people in the stands. But it's almost like what you were saying, is that even when Overwatch League was big, it really was trying to be big, but
Right.
it wasn't.
So we know what we think about it. What's
Yeah.
Matthew's take on it?
So Matt, what is your take on? Do you know when we're talking about stadium esports, we're talking about experiencing an esport like it's a regular sport, like it's a traditional sport. Go into the stands. There's an announcer. There's cheerleaders or whatever.
I mean, he played it in high school.
You played it in high school esports, where we were trying to create that stadium esports environment. So, what is your take on? Is there a market for that? Was there a market for that, and then it died? Or is that just not really something that is all that important to the esports generation?
I think the idea of like a stadium esport is an amazing idea, and I think that it is practical whenever you do it like maybe once every so often. I think whenever you start trying to do them like every weekend, that's whenever it gets a little weird because people don't want to pay all that much money whenever they could just watch it at home for free on Twitch.
Yeah, so it's kind of there's kind of a balancing act of you want to get a little injection of the experience from time to time, but you don't want it to necessarily become mundane and something that you have to do to experience it or whatever. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk for a second about, I don't know anything about this game, but apparently Overwatch was big. It kind of peaked. It kind of had a falling off. Blizzard tried to really kind of reinvigorate the game, relaunch the game with Overwatch 2. So Matt and Dustin, y'all kind of catch us up on what is happening with Overwatch 2. What was Blizzard trying to do with Overwatch 2? What changes did they try to make? How were they trying to bring the game back? What worked? What didn't? Matt, you go first.
I think they just did not have enough content for what they were trying to do. They were trying to relaunch it as like more of kind of they had like the whole like PvE situation, which the game like took like what they announced it in like 2019 and then it released in 2022 with no PvE, and then about a year ago they just said, oh, no more PvE, it's done. So I think they really messed up because they promised a lot more than they could actually like follow up on, because like in the 2019 to 2022, like Jeff Kaplan, the game director, he left. Like they kind of had like a whole new team come in and just have to clean up whatever the old team left behind. So I think what they messed up on is promising way too much. Like had they going to rework the game a little bit and then a little PvE on the side, I think it would have went up perfect. But they just promised too much, I think.
Dustin, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I agree with that. So what they did was they had those story missions, and those were super cool. That was sort of like the prelude to what the PvE could have been. But yeah, they showed a bunch of gameplay of like, oh, these are things you can do, and clearly it existed. But then they had this content drought of 2 years where Jeff Kaplan just said, we're not releasing anything else. We're only focusing on Overwatch 2, and also Overwatch 2 at that point was only supposed to be PvE, but they halted all this PvP, which is the only thing you have. Jeff Kaplan came from, he was the game designer for World of Warcraft, and he surprisingly, given that, it's weird that his take was, I don't like live service games. And I mean, like, he's about our age. It makes sense.
He's probably sick of it from World of Warcraft. Yeah. He might have been like, I don't like live service games because I'm sick of it from World of Warcraft.
Well, but it makes sense because, like, one of my big gripes is that people release games broken now because you can just hotfix them. And, like, Jeff doesn't come from that school. He likes to have a game done and have it release working. And, like, that's noble, but if you have a live service game, you can't just halt all production. But one of the things that they've done now with the new, and Matthew probably knows more about what the new system is, but they've sort of low-key launched Overwatch League now with the new Open Division, or whatever they're calling it, the Path to Pro, where basically everybody, contenders and Open Division and Overwatch League, are all the same thing now, and they're broadcasting it weekly with Zoe and Jake, and I think Reinforce are all doing desk stuff, and they have casters, and it's the same thing, but basically anybody can be on it that's high up on the ladder.
Yeah, so Matthew, I don't know if you could hear that really clearly, but are you following the new generation of the Overwatch League and the Path to Pro, what they used to call Open Division and Contenders and all that? Are you following that?
Oh yeah, that's why I went to DreamHack, because they held their first what it's called is the Overwatch Champion Series, the OWCS. They had their first major at DreamHack, and I think it's way better than Overwatch League. Like, not production-wise. The first, like, 2 seasons of Overwatch League are, like, undefeated in my opinion. Those are, like, my favorite things ever.
Yeah.
But I think, so what they have is they have, like, it's just, like, open signups. Like, literally anyone can play, anyone can qualify, and it's a lot less, like, it doesn't push down as much on like newer talent. I know that like they were trying to get like a tier 2 and tier 1 system with contenders, but they didn't really have an efficient plan for it. The plan for contenders was just to win and then hope that an Overwatch League team likes you enough to pick you up. And this new system, you could qualify if you perform well enough. I think DreamHack for North America, they had like 3 slots, and two of the top teams. M80 is one of them. It's slipping my mind who the other one is. Toronto Defiant. They were an old Overwatch League team, and they just kept on doing the OWCS. And then out of nowhere, this team, Students of the Game, they qualified for number 3, and it's like those people would have never gotten a chance had it been in the old ecosystem, and they ended up getting picked up by NRG. They're now the NRG Shock. So that's
Nice.
it's
That's awesome.
just pretty cool to be able to see like the new talent come up.
We actually have somebody in the chat. Do you know who Zenzel is? Zenzel says he
Yeah,
played
yeah,
in
I
OWCS
went-
Stage 1.
I went with him to
Okay.
to the major.
That's in the Twitch chat, Eric. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so I maybe just because my brain is so focused on Halo, but it kind of sounds like some of the problems with Halo Infinite was similar to what y'all were describing with Overwatch 2, which is like they had all this lofty vision of what they were going to do and what they were going to put out, and then it's like they just couldn't figure out how to do it. Whether they didn't have the developers, they didn't have the coders, or they didn't have the whatever it was, they just couldn't produce the amount. If they could have done what they said they were going to do, it would have been. Oh wait, did I kick Matthew out here? Let me get him back in here. Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. It was like if they could have realized their own vision, it would have been great. And that was kind of one of the things about Halo Infinite too, is it had all this promise. And Overwatch 2 is kind of the same thing. It's like it launched and it was going to revitalize the game. And if they would have been able to do all the things they said they were going to do, probably would have, right?
Well, maybe. But
Maybe
one of the things that lost a lot of players like me that played tank, which was the most unfun role according to the community. Whenever they went down to 5v5, like the thing I like about tank is enabling my team to do their thing through whatever means I have. I like having peel, and kind of the big moments for a tank aren't I killed somebody, it's I saved this person's bacon. Mm-hmm. And whenever they went down to 5v5, they made it, the comment that everybody made was, it's more shootery. Well, that's
shootery.
That's not what I want to do in Overwatch. Right. That's not why I play it, because I want it to be twitchy. I don't want it to be like Call of Duty and all those games. I want it to be team oriented.
Yeah, objective based.
And so like they just turned every role, in my opinion, into DPS, and tank became fat DPS.
Yeah.
And so that to me took a lot of the game away, and a lot of people quit because they liked that synergy between the two tanks having to feed off of each other and enabling your other tank to do their thing.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I loved about Overwatch, and y'all always made fun of me, rightly so, for always being a frontline Lucio and always wanted to be out fighting as Lucio, but I tried to keep that under control. But one of the great things about it is you don't have to be a great twitchy shooter. You don't have to be able to land headshots to play the game. There's ways to excel and succeed in a role that don't involve I'm good at CSGO. So now I'm going to play Overwatch. You don't have to do that. You can be, if you play Lucio, you just kind of lob your bullets out there and you stay around your team and be healing them or speeding them. And if you're playing tank, if you're Winston or Orisa, you shot some, but mostly you're just being in the right place to soak the damage. And that's the antithesis of, like, CSGO and Halo both are kind of the same way, which is you have 4 identical people. They all have identical weapons that they start with, and the guys you're playing against are all 4 identical, and they all start with identical weapons. And it's just your skill as a shooter versus their skill as a shooter, and your skill at communicating versus their skill at communicating. Whereas Overwatch had a lot more diversity.
What you're describing about the tank, taking away one of the tanks and moving it more towards everybody's just DPS, that's what kind of killed it for me. I was already kind of off it, but I would have come back if Overwatch 2 came back and it was a big deal. I love to play Orisa, and for all the reasons you just said. And so I'm with Dustin on that. That was a game design choice that I didn't like, in addition to just kind of the game was not a lot of content.
So Matthew, did you play any of Marvel Rivals?
I did not get the chance to play any Marvel Rivals. I was watching the Twitch streams, and it did not look too enticing to me.
So Marvel Rivals, Dustin, tell us about Marvel Rivals, since you kind of are the expert in that. You might have like one iota.
Maybe he played it once.
I have about an hour under my belt.
More than us.
Really, Chubchilla would be the expert. I think he put in like almost 40 hours in the 2 weeks it was out.
Wow.
he grinded it a bunch. But Marvel Rivals, I was really excited about it first because it's basically Overwatch 1 reskinned with Marvel characters. Like, a lot of the maps are almost carbon copies of it. There's like a Hanamura clone and a bunch of other ones. And then you have these roles. You have tank, like Hulk, Magneto, Doctor Strange. They're all tanks. And then one of the cool things is you have actual team-ups, kind of like Marvel versus Capcom, where you get a team build-up and you can do these special moves with them. Did y'all ever play Marvel versus Capcom? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, that'd be like Hulk throwing Spider-Man.
Is that the arcade
Wolverine,
game?
Hulk throwing Hulk throwing Wolverine. And
So, if you have different special moves in Marvel versus Capcom based on who you have on your team. Marvel Rivals is much the same way. Like, if you have Groot and Rocket, Rocket can ride on Groot. Rocket gets damage reduction for riding on him, and then he's basically a turret that rides on Groot. Groot is also a tank. No, Groot is a support. Anyway, so you have all these roles. Supports. Tank is beefy. They have more hit points. They have some sort of way to mitigate damage, and DPS just do a bunch of damage. At least that's the way it's framed up. But it, much like Overwatch 2, just feels like everybody's kind of just playing DPS. And granted, I didn't play competitive on it, so there wasn't a whole lot of team synergy, and I only played a couple games. But I did play games with friends, and we sort of communicated, hey, this person on point, cat point, pull back, and we did things as a team, but everybody was basically DPS with just a different skill set.
Yeah.
League of Legends still has that locked down on the everybody's doing something different.
Yeah.
Kind of, they're sticking with that for sure.
Yeah. Okay, Matthew, before we move into some trivia, let's talk about the potential future of shooter esports. We have a with Sign Esports, we have a Smash Brothers tournament coming up this week, and we're going to do that, and then we're going to do another esports event at Lake Area Ventures. We've kind of talked about doing Overwatch 2 as that second event to get a different crowd. So if you were kind of writing the script for the future of local esports, what are some things that you would put kind of in the rundown of points that we need to hit on if you were writing the script for the esports in the Lake area in the future? Specifically for shooters, Overwatch, if you think that's the key, but really like for the shooter community, what do you think is the secret to the future of esports in our area?
I just think not necessarily like consistent as in like every week, but like every I'd say about like 4 months or so you could run a tournament, just because I know people that are hesitant to be involved because they don't know exactly what it holds. Just like the more consistent it is, the more likely you are to get people involved. Like Smash, for example, like what you guys have done with like the Scion Fight Club and stuff, like the consistent like tournaments, those are amazing. And for shooters, it's not as easy as that to just set up a switch and then plug in 2 controllers and then go. So honestly, I think that's really all that you need is just like consistent-ish tournaments.
Yeah, so we're going to find out kind of if Overwatch 2 is the game, because we really want to have a shooter in kind of the culture, and we're going to find out. So one of the biggest challenges is always getting the word out. So any you guys that are watching this podcast, if y'all are kind of interested in seeing Overwatch come back, let us know. More importantly, letting us know, let your friends know. We didn't have any questions in the mailbag this week, so does anybody have any parting thoughts while I pull up the
Well,
trivia?
I think everybody watching the podcast right now, Matthew on the podcast as well, but everybody watching, y'all tell us what you want the podcast to be about. Like, we need to keep make sure everybody knows that. Whatever the hot topics are, we'll talk. We have a lot of knowledge about a lot of things, and we're also pretty good at talking about...
I think we have a little knowledge about a lot of things.
No, we have a lot of knowledge about a lot of things, and what I was going to say after that is, even the things we don't have a lot of knowledge about, we're still good at talking about.
Yeah.
Even if we don't have a lot of knowledge about them.
That's what our podcast on the YouTube and Podbean description, it says podcast where founders of esports talk about whatever you want us to talk about. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay, so it's time to move on to Matthew. You gonna stick around with us for trivia?
I don't think so. Thank y'all for having me though.
No problem.
All right, he's just scared is what it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's intimidated.
I'm 100% confident
Matthew, thanks
would
for
beat
coming.
me.
It's been great. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you at our next Sign Esports event. It is time for just a few minutes of trivia, and we're going to decide how long we do this trivia.
Based on how fun it is.
Based on how fun it is and how good these questions are. So what the story is, I didn't have time to write my own trivia questions. I really like doing that. I really like writing a detailed rundown for us to talk about and a list of trivia questions. But this week, with the end of month, I just didn't have time to do it. So I found an app that is only sometimes seems like it's a poor translation from Chinese.
Is it going to ask questions about more than one game?
It is
because
called
it's already
video-
going to be better than the Wheel of Destiny. If it
The
does.
Wheel of Destiny has not been serving us very well in variety. So it is called Video Game Trivia.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And we're going to just go one question at a time. And this is going to be a shout out.
We do shout it out now. It's way more fun. It's faster.
So if you're still in the Discord, the way this works is it's Eric versus Dustin versus the Discord. I think we still owe Chubchilla a prize because he actually won a question early on. But so the way it works is Eric versus Dustin versus the Discord. So Eric and Dustin are going to shout out the answers. If neither one of them get it right, let's see, E, G, and D. If neither one of them get it right, then we'll go to the G for Grizz. G for Grizz, not G for Jizz. All right, so here we go. Play a game. In Super Mario Kart for SNES, which is Vanilla Lake 1 found in?
Vanilla Lake?
Mushroom Cup.
Dustin says Mushroom Cup. That is not correct.
Well,
that's the name of a map?
Vanilla Lake. I don't remember it.
No, that's not the name.
Super Mario Kart.
That's not the name of a
Guess
map.
a cup. Guess a cup.
Okay, Flower Cup.
Flower Cup is not correct.
It
was Star Cup.
Okay.
In the
There's
PS3
not a game called Vanilla. Okay, that's fine.
Did anybody from Discord know that? No. In the PS3 game, Resident Evil 5,
Never played.
which of the following is not a way to restore your health? First aid spray, drinking water, eating eggs, or herbs? Which one is not a way to restore your health?
Eating eggs.
Drinking water.
Eating eggs is not correct. Drinking water is the correct answer. You cannot drink water and restore your health. Eric gets that correct.
That was actually my initial guess, and it just seemed like maybe that was where.
All right, next question. Which of these Nintendo Wii games is not a racing game? F1 2009, My Sims Racing, GT Pro Series, or SSX Blur? Which one is
Blur.
not a real racing game? SSX Blur? That is correct.
Yeah.
Grizz gets that one. Okay, which of the following is an NES black box game? Do y'all know what black box game means?
Not really, but let's go.
I don't know. Faxinadu, DuckTales 2, Shadowgate, or Urban Champion?
Urban Champion.
Which of the following is an NES black box?
Is?
Yeah.
Oh, Faxinadu.
Oh, it was Urban Champion.
Oh, Urban Champion.
Yeah.
Well, that was his first guess, right?
Yep, you get correct.
I think
correct
he gets
answer.
it, yeah.
All right, let me give Grizz a point here.
Man, it looks like Vanilla Lake was a race in the Mario Kart. Yeah.
Okay, how many power stars?
I remember it. It's ice all around the outside and the lake's in the middle. I just don't remember
that's called Vanilla Lake?
I just don't remember being called Vanilla Lake. Okay, go ahead.
All right, how many power stars can be found in Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo 64?
Total number?
Total number, how many stars were there?
108.
It's
actually not that far off.
It's not 1,000, but it's more than 50. 128.
120, how many?
7. 9.
120.
2. 120.
The correct answer. 120. All right. Next question. Who was the first president of Nintendo of America?
Oh, wow. I couldn't even venture a guess.
Okay. It gives you some options.
Okay.
I'm going to read them to y'all. Reggie Fils, Doug Bowser, Steve Ballmer, or Minoru Arakawa?
Minoru Arakawa.
That is correct. Hashtag no racism. Okay. In Final Fantasy VI.
Wait, do I only have 2 points?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know you're used to destroying me.
Yeah.
In Final Fantasy VI, what enemy kills General Leo?
Kefka. Oh, no, it's the big Guardian.
It's, okay.
Is it the Guardian?
It is, it is Kefka. They give you credit for Kefka. Yeah.
Right. I said it first.
Yeah.
You did.
Yep. Luigi fights ghosts in what GameCube
Luigi's
game?
Mansion.
Luigi's Mansion 1, 2, and 3.
Nah, I'm going to give that one to Dustin. He got
it. Yep.
What developer is responsible for Metroid Prime 2 for the GameCube?
Rare?
No.
I don't even have the slightest idea.
Retro Studios.
Retro Studios, okay. Rare is GoldenEye.
Yeah. All right, how many more of these y'all want to do?
A few more. These are fun. And they're fast.
Okay, which of the following is not a Sega Saturn exclusive? Decathlete, Sky Target, Nights into Dreams, or 10-Pin Alley?
10-Pin Alley.
That is correct, and I'm going to give you all both.
Then we tied on that
was about as much of a tie as you can possibly get. What company developed GoldenEye 007 for Nintendo 64? That is correct. Eric gets that one. That is pretty funny.
I feel cheated. These are all...
And you know it wasn't a guess either, because I just said, GoldenEye. That was rare.
Yeah. Okay, here's an interesting question. Good diversity question. What was the first video game to be have a woman as its lead designer?
Lead designer?
Yep.
I don't know. Do you
Climax.
have the answer right there?
Yeah, it was Centipede.
Centipede, like from 1 billion years ago?
Yep, I guess. So obviously the video game industry was pretty inclusive from early on.
Super inclusive. Yeah, just what the video game industry is known for being.
Yep. What Zelda game was a launch title? It's not very Sega friendly, Dustin.
No, it's not.
I'm not picking these. I'm not curating.
Right. Yeah, that's fine.
What Zelda game was a launch title for the Nintendo Wii?
Where he turns into the wolf.
Twilight Princess.
Yes.
I'm gonna give Dustin credit for that one.
I think Dustin gets it.
Thanks for the hint, Eric. I'm sure Dustin.
Well, no, I was I was debating between that and if
Wind Waker.
Wind Waker was GameCube. I was debating if it was that or the Crossbow Training, because they were both very early on, but I didn't know if that would really count.
All right, this is an interesting question. What 32-bit system? We kind of talked about this with Sam. What 32-bit system was released in 1993 that had 64-bit graphics?
Sega
Sam
CD?
actually said it. I remember. It was the Atari Jaguar.
Okay.
It had a mismatched bus or whatever. Where it's
sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dude, I haven't heard about the Jaguar in so long.
Right.
Yep.
That's a good question.
Okay. Who is the main character in the game Earthbound for SNES?
NES.
That is Eric. Eric got on NES quicker there.
I've actually never played Earthbound.
It's awesome.
It's a classic.
Earthbound
I just remember it had the scratch and sniff stickers.
Earthbound has this cool feature where once you're like 2 or 3 levels higher than the enemies, you don't fight, you just win. You can sit there and you can grind. Like
the enemy random encounters surrender to you.
Yeah, and
that's cool.
So you can grind like there's this point where you get strong enough that you can all of a sudden you can grind like 10 times faster, and then it slows down again. But like right when you get there, it just flashes and you defeat the enemy.
3 more questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Dustin, you got to get them all to tie Eric.
Oh.
In Star Wars: The Old Republic, what class belongs to the Sith Empire? Smuggler, consular, trooper, or bounty hunter?
Trooper?
I think it is trooper. I think he gets it.
It looks like it was bounty hunter.
Okay. They have trooper. Maybe has both.
Yep. This 1980 video game has you, or what 1980 video game has you flying by bombers, swarmers, and pods?
Galaga.
It's actually the console port of the first ever arcade game.
Space Wars.
That's correct. Oh wait, no, that's not correct. Oh, sorry. It was highlighted like it was correct. What did you say?
Galaga.
Nope, it was Defender.
Defender.
Oh, yep. Okay.
Okay. Last question. What was the first 3D system to be designed by Nintendo?
Nintendo 64. Nintendo Ultra 64.
Correct answer is Famicom 3D.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Maybe was that a predecessor to Nintendo 64 in Japan?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, Famicom's what they called all the NES systems in Japan, but I don't know when that came out.
That's probably more like that Nintendo PlayStation kind of concept. Maybe that was then.
Yep. Y'all ready to call tonight?
This is nice to know that we ended on three L's.
Yeah. You want to ask some more until y'all get...
No, it's fine.
You don't have to.
I feel thoroughly defeated. It's okay.
Dustin had to get 3 right, and we both got all 3 wrong.
Which
That's
is
a good time.
like tying, yeah. All right, okay,
we can stop.
The trivia finals was Eric 8 to Dustin 5, which is pretty good.
That's the closest I've ever come.
Yeah. So we'll see you back in 2 weeks, Dustin. Actually, are you going to join us next week remotely, or are you going to be playing?
I'll be playing D&D again.
Is next week the all remote week?
Next week is the all remote, and it's going to be community themed. We're going to have a lot of our people that are contributors that have been with us for quite a while from kind of different, areas of influence of Sign Esports.
I might tag in
Lewis
depending on how
you can tag in. Yeah,
just hop in and tell us how. What's your character's name?
In that campaign, it is Canticus Singvogel.
Canticus Singvogel.
So y'all can
He's
pop in.
the cleric who wants to be a bard.
Canticus
Singvogel.
So I'll try to remember.
Sing us a song.
Yeah.
And
No, he can't sing.
Yeah,
Oh, he's not a
can't
good
sing,
singer?
right? Lewis from the Reef Podcast is going to join us. He's been one of our TOs and kind of social media people with Sign Esports for quite a while. I think Bailey's going to hop on and talk about her esports career, kind of our potentially most famous esports prodigy. Bailey's going to jump on. Our Halo coach, Ben, is going to jump on, I think, and tell us a little bit about what's going on with our Halo team. So it's going to be cool. It's going to be a lot of community involvement.
one time you need to get somebody on from that Stories from Waypoint on our podcast
Yes,
to talk,
I will
because that was
definitely
really
do that.
cool. We need to promote that. That's
Yeah.
really, really cool.
Yeah, we will definitely.
If you haven't
have it.
listened to Stories from Waypoint, you should go look it up.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to Stories from Waypoint, go look it up. You can find it on signesports.com. There's a link on it there. You can go to Jumperscape Media's website and check it out there. We got a lot of cool things going on. We're going to be talking. We'll probably bring that up next week on our community focused podcast, and maybe I can get those guys from Jumperscape to come on in a little while. So, other than that, thank you guys for joining us. Matthew, thank you for getting on. You guys at home, thanks for buying cars from Lake Charles Toyota. Thanks for coming to Sign Esports events, and thank you very much for watching the Founders Podcast.